Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Robin.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Jasmin.
And we're discussing Chapter 3, The Monster and the Superhero. So I am delighted to be joined by the hosts of the Ham Radio podcast. Ashley has, of course, joined me once before, back in October, for our revisit of Trick or Treat Freak, but this is Jasmin's debut hopping on here. So thanks so much to both of you for being a part of this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now, while Coffee and Contemplation went on hiatus, you have stayed quite active on your podcast since July of 2022. I mean, you've delved into theories and predictions and all sorts of good stuff, some of which I've actually alluded to in some previous episodes. So given that, when it comes to season 4 as a whole, do you find that you feel any differently now than you did from your initial reaction back in 2022?
If I don't watch season 4 for, a couple months and I start rewatching it, I still, go back to some of the feels I had when I initially watched it. But at the same token, when you rewatch something repeatedly, you do begin to notice things that you go, man, they could have done this, and this a little bit better. I wish they hadn't have done that. I wish they had done this instead, little, idiosyncrasies. But I definitely get the feels each time. Going into season 4, I had very high expectations. And for the most part, wow, they're really stepping up their game here. And a lot of what I've been hearing and seeing online about it being scarier and a little bit, more adult-like, if you will, has come to fruition.
Yeah, I think for me, I would echo some of that. I think that sense of excitement and expectation we felt coming to season 4 is still there every time I rewatch. I start noticing little things that I didn't before. So, set pieces, costuming, lines the characters say, framing, what's in the background. You kind of discover more things as you go along. And my expectations for the season were also quite high. So it was really cool to see those expectations met. I mean, there's always things that could be done better or differently. But overall, I mean, we were all expecting this big epic season that matched the maturity level that the actors and characters are now at. And I think they delivered on that in a big way. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but I think this show comes as close as you can to delivering on what they said they were going to deliver on. And that's really challenging to do, especially with so much hype surrounding it. So yeah, I think on rewatch, I've come to appreciate the little details even more than I did kind of the first time.
Awesome. Very cool. So you both came away and still have ultimately pretty positive feelings about season 4.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I liked season 4.
Cool. So then I mentioned in our Hellfire Club episode that as a result of working on my second podcast, Classified, I sort of stepped out of the Stranger Things fandom and the community, and I really missed it, which I only fully realized when you guys had your live stream event. And just being a part of that was really the final push I needed to get back into the game. So thank you for that as well. And it makes it all the more fitting that you're here for a season 4 episode. So with all that said, let's proceed with contemplation. So we start with this cold open, which I'm noticing a pattern is starting to emerge with these episodes, that the cold opens stand apart, which it wasn't necessarily a given. Like, I wasn't sure moving into this season with revisiting this group structure for discussion if that was going to remain the case, or if eventually it was, and who knows, it might. I'm trying not to look too far ahead for these recordings, but this one definitely stood apart for me anyway. So this is that sequence with Owens and Lieutenant Colonel Jack Sullivan. I don't know about the two of you, but I like this sequence a lot. It's one of those that plays, at least to me, really differently, knowing all of what follows. I know I'm on record now multiple times saying that I'm not a fan of the misdirect as regards the Hawkins massacre, but this one I like. I mean, I don't know if it's intended to be an alien invasion fake out at the beginning, but it's short, so I like it if it is intended to be that.
I think it is too. I think if it's not a fake out, an homage, that's kind of how I took it, like an ET type homage.
Mm-hmm.
I too love this cold open, like the way it's shot, but also like what we learn through that scene. Like, yeah, there's a lot of double meaning, but we also learn a lot about Owen's life, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He obviously knows more than what he's saying, but also I do think he genuinely cares. I don't think that's fake. And I think that is why Joyce and Hopper are willing to work with him because they see that. And if you have to pick an ally out of these people, Owens is really your only choice.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found so interesting is like the helicopter freaking lands in front of their home and Owens doesn't wake up.
Yeah.
Like his wife has to wake him up, which tells me, because we don't really know we know he has a medical degree. We know he has some sort of like, presumably like a PhD in psychology. Like I'd always kind of wondered like, what was his actual background before he got pulled into this project? Or before they picked him. And to me, this scene kind of says, I feel like he must have worked in either as like an ER doctor or something where there'd be a lot of noise or stuff going around, so much so that a helicopter landing wouldn't wake you up. You could sleep through it. And I kind of lean to that because I feel like if he was a military doctor, we'd see him pick up a weapon at some point, but he doesn't at any point.
That's true.
So like to me, that kind of, we learned a lot in a very short period of time, and that was really interesting to me. And also just his reaction versus like his wife's, like her pots and pans are falling. She's completely freaked out.
Yeah.
And Owens is like cool as a cucumber. One obviously comes from training, but he obviously knows he has to be. And like that scene where she's like, Sam, do something. And he's just sitting there because he knows he can't.
Yeah, like there's nothing to be done. Yeah.
Also because, I mean, this is heavily implied, but he clearly can't tell his wife or his child what he's up to, right? Like he's never been able to do that. So they obviously, like his wife has no idea. She can't know, that's putting her in, he even says at the beginning, like, I've put my family's life in jeopardy here, even though she doesn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought that juxtaposition was really interesting. It also sets up to, and Ashley and I have talked about this, our dislike of Colonel Sullivan and like the bad guys in this season. It does not look like a sophisticated military operation to me. It looks like big stupid guys smashing stuff. Especially because we see Owens pull out the briefcase that has like the laptop, like, well, not a laptop as we know it, but their version of it at that time would have been like the transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they leave, he pulls out a briefcase. I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like the fact that this is supposed to be like top military brass and they're like, it's in the school projects. It's not, because I mean, that would be an incredibly like that would be foolish to put something there,
Like you and Jasmine said, I really liked it because it was, a different type of cold opening because you're in Nevada and you're like, what the heck are we doing here? Like, whose house is this? Also, love that house. Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Owens is probably now in the private sector because the fact that he lives in a nice house like this, but also it does make me question, like, did Owens and his wife always live out there, or did they move out there after he was fired after season 2, and that's kind of like his little hideaway.
That was always my assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it does, really tell us a lot about him, Owens as a person, that, he's a family man. Whereas we know Dr. Brenner is not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
This is when the cold opening ends with Sullivan leaving in the helicopter. I kind of also wonder who he's radioing into, like when he says, he knows about the girl will lead us to her or something like that. I wonder who he's transmitting messages with, if he's doing that at all, or he could just be talking to someone in the helicopter. But it's never really addressed, but that's just my own curiosity.
That's a great question, though. I hadn't considered that. But I think when I first watched the sequence, I also was very curious, like, wait, why are we in Nevada? But then I was really excited because one of the things I left season 3 with was really wondering, where is Owens? Because we see him so briefly, fleetingly at the end of season 3. And I was like, okay, and then we saw him in the trailer for season 4 and just wondering, okay, how are they going to bring him back in? Into what capacity? When is he going to show up? And I was really rooting for him. I don't feel the same way at the end of season 4 that I felt at the beginning, but on that first watch, I was very excited by this opening sequence. And, for us, we had I've said it before, we watched the first 2 episodes that night and then we took the break. So coming back and starting here was a really jarring, not too jarring, but it had been kind of a, wait a minute, disorienting as a place to start. But I liked it. And it was disorienting, but in kind of a because they didn't leave you wondering for too long, kind of like with the alien invasion homage, it felt like they didn't leave you wondering too long. And and kind of that bouncing off of your question, Ashley, the scope of this danger has gotten so much bigger. There's the big, that this does go even potentially above Sullivan's rank, that this goes all the way up through the ranks of the government. I like the way that kind of escalates things and how fast it does that. The idea that they would pin this Hawkins crime on Elle. Yeah, it's another really strong start to the episode. So from there, we're going to shift, though, into our first group. And the California crew, they are not having a good time. I mean, this opening sequence at the rink, up until when they get into the van, how did that work for the two of you?
Angela and her entire storyline does not feel realistic to me at all, just for so many reasons. I think, Ashley, we've talked about this previously, but one of the things that doesn't work about the California storyline, especially when we cut back to Max in Hawkins afterwards, is the fact that the characters the adults and the employees of this universe in Lenore Hills, California, don't seem to be rooted in reality. But then you cut back to Hawkins and they totally are, which is very jarring to me. And I think it was for a lot of people. For example, the paramedics treat Angela and she's out there acting like the victim. And then the paramedics treat Angela, but apparently the police do not show up and take statements from anybody. Just that entire sequence, it's well, normally, in real life, the employees would turn the lights up, shut the rink down, and clean the whole thing. Yet the paramedics treat her and she's just released. And so they're just sitting at this table. And I'm like, what? Because I was totally shocked when the police later show up because I'm like, hold the phone. None of the things that would need to happen happened there. Jonathan and Argo just able to pick them up and take them home. The framing of it is great. And, I think the acting on the part of our main characters is great, but the whole framing and the setup of it just doesn't work because it's not grounded in reality. So when we cut back to Hawkins, it's kind of like Whiplash.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the scene was pretty unrealistic in that the scene was not cleared. All these people are just being allowed to stand there and watch this girl get her nose treated. And also, Jasmin said, no one, got a written statement from either one of the girls or the witnesses or anything like that. And then you have 11 over there just fuming, she should have been, just removed from the scene altogether. Or I've also heard on another podcast, Mike, Will, and 11 should have just fled. I mean, because at this point, she's going to get, as we know, she's going to get arrested anyway. So why not just flee the scene of a crime and just go home and pretend like nothing happened, But I mean, I thought, the actors did a good job with what they were given. But I don't really have a problem with the scene. It definitely is one of their more unrealistic scenes.
I mean, I think they could have done something to allow us to infer that they've already taken statements. I do like that some of the setup within the frame or within the scene. The fact that Elle is isolated, that Mike and Will are both keeping their distance. Also, to follow up with something that Jenna said last episode regarding Quinn's performance in the boathouse, I think that Brown here is doing a lot with her face in just that one shot. There's a mix of anger, there's fear, there's concern, self-loathing, it's a lot, and she's communicating it all really silently in one shot. I was impressed with that. in terms of like little fixes. I kind of wish that Angela had been more dazed, that she is suffering from, and I quote, grade 2 concussion. Because, I mean, I'm guessing that the implication is that Angela has lied, but wouldn't they have to go off of medical records? I don't know if that just adds to the...
It seems they took it off, literally let somebody, like, that Angela's parents or family called it in, and they talked to her, and were like, okay. Like, that's not how that works.
I wish that they had either committed more to this idea that she really hurt Angela, or had done something that got us further along, because the point of all of this is to get 11 to Owens. So I think this is yet another example of the bloat. So I don't know.
Yeah, and like I think part of what bothers me too is that comparing like California to Hawkins is from the scenes we see, Lenore Hills is obviously a much more modern city. Like Hawkins is a small town in rural Indiana, and it looks and feels that way. And Lenore Hills is obviously like it's a small town. Owen says that, but Indianapolis is the closest city to Hawkins, right? But it's a ways away.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Lenore Hills is clearly closer to a larger metropolitan center. You can see that in the architecture and also like specifically the police station. And Hawkins is clearly on its own. Like they have the resources they have. These are people who are used to dealing with like pumpkin thefts. Whereas Lenore Hills is clearly connected to a larger network. And so when they play fast and loose with the rules, we're like, the police apparently just took Angela's word for it. And then like when they interrogate her, interview her without an advocate present, without a parent present, but then they won't let Jonathan, who like when he's there and his mother's absent, is her stands in as her legal guardian, they won't let him see her or will. And then like it's obviously interrogation that like something is not right. So that like they should have clocked that. So like they clearly have the resources to do the job properly and like according to the receptionist have protocols in place, but then they don't use them. It's like the plot only uses that when it's convenient, and because Hawkins is so grounded in reality with what we do see, that juxtaposition, like it just doesn't work in terms of like our main characters did a really good job with some kind of ludicrous material, I would say. Like what they were given didn't make any sense, but they did a really good job with it. I'll give them credit for that.
Shifting, though, into a different side of all of this, I think one of the biggest things that I find to be missing from Elle's storyline specifically, I think I've commented on this at least once in the past 2 episodes, it's that they're only focusing on the lab massacre. It doesn't make sense to me that we're not also seeing more flashbacks from season 1 and season 2. If we're talking about Elle's whole experience of being a quote-unquote monster, and especially with the line about, did you want to kill her? That when she's asked that, she wanted to kill Ray in season 2. That was the first time that I'm pretty sure that she had deliberately chosen to seek someone out with the intentionality to hurt them, to kill them, rather than reacting under duress. And then to top it all off, the fact is she didn't kill those kids. So this idea of connecting, even if she remembers them being dead, the fact that we're only focusing on that, yeah, I'm just going to reiterate, the show is not playing fair with the flashbacks.
Well, that's, was a big thing I took issue with as well, because when we finally get to Nina, the whole thing, the premise is like, you need to, go back to this massacre that happened that, you've suppressed because it was traumatic, and you need to do that in order to get your powers back. But yet we see that the more and more she gets bullied and things like that happen, the flashbacks to that are already starting to come up. So I didn't really understand, and I still don't quite understand why they felt the need to show us those little flashbacks, her having those flashbacks to the massacre so early on. The shot looked really cool in this episode of her doing that. But to me, it was a little overkill. I didn't really like the way they chose to let that play out.
I think it's a thing that, like, it works much better on that first watch through because it's the same misdirect as in the first episode. They're trying to, and the second for that matter, they're trying to make the audience believe that 11 killed all the other numbers. But the problem is that, I mean, you just said, like, it kind of falls apart as soon as she gets to Nina, because I wondered that on my first watch through as well. But then going back through it for rewatch value, it totally falls apart. And that's kind of what I mean when I say that this show plays so fast and loose with its cutaways, because sometimes it is literally someone's direct thought pattern. And I love it when they do that. And I think what we're all three of us, and what both Heidi and Jenna have also touched on in the past 2 episodes, is this idea that I think Eleven's storyline is just really, really, it's muddled, and it lacks, I think, the airtight control that I feel like you get with, I mean, Hawkins especially. Given how much went into this, I think this is one of the areas where it snowballed a little bit beyond their capacity. I mean, and it was funny because I watched this episode twice, and, you know, kind of the first time through, I was thinking, well, we do get that one cutaway to season 1, but that's an Owen sequence. That's in the cold open. That's not Eleven's thought process. Her stuff is all of the Hawkins massacre. But again, I say I don't know why, but I know why. It's because they want it to look like that she's thinking that she killed those kids in the lab, even though it doesn't work beyond the surface level. But I want to jump though to Mike and Elle's conversation there, the conversation that does come after they get home. I mean, we can circle back to the ridiculous dinner scene in a minute, but I want to get to the meat of that conversation, because I believe, Ashley, I understand that you have some thoughts about this scene, which you touched on briefly in our Trick or Treat Freak episode back in the fall.
Yeah, that it very much parallels the fight that Steve and Nancy had when Nancy broke up with Steve. I felt like a really strong acting moment from Million Dollar Brown and Finn Wolfhard. I thought it was probably their best performances, really, of the first half of season 4, because it felt very organic. And I just remember, like, the first time that I watched this scene when she says, "You don't love me anymore," and then turns around, there's, you know, tears welling up in her eyes, and then she gets up and does the from Mike thing. I really liked her performance doing that, because, you know, this is like probably the most vocal that we've really heard 11 up to this point. It just shows like how much progress 11 has made as an individual up to this point. And I know that Mike, you know, gets a very bad rep, but I thought he did the right thing here by calmly going in and approaching it and just trying to, you know, understand why she did what she did. But it's definitely what I really like about the meat of it is that these are just 2 14-year-olds who are separated by distance, and, you know, they come from very different backgrounds, and right now we're just not seeing eye to eye. You know, for a moment there, I really did think that, like, this is the end of 11, and I really did think that. Now, I don't really know what they're going to be like in season 5, but personally, I think they'll still be together. But yeah, that I really liked this scene, this moment between them.
Jasmin, how about you?
Yeah, I liked it too. And I have to say, Ashley's thoughts on 11 are always so much deeper and eloquent than mine will ever be. So I always love hearing her thoughts on that. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard scene to watch, but I agree it's also, you know, really great acting. I like that it was like a real grown-up conversation, like it was a real discussion. And so this is a lot more, they're teenagers now, so it's much more grown up, and I like that they leaned into that. I like that they talked about it in a real way. They didn't shy away from it. They didn't pretend like it didn't happen. And I hadn't noticed that parallel that you mentioned, Ashley, about Steve and Nancy's fight in season 2. But you're right that there are a lot of similarities. What I did notice, and I think this season as a whole showed to me, was I think, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this online, is that both Mike and Nancy struggle with saying "I love you" and expressing how they feel because of their parents' loveless marriage and because of the environment they grew up in. Why? I mean, from Eleven's perspective, if you feel it, why can't you say it? I mean, after everything she's been through, if she can express it, why can't he? And I like that they didn't shy away from that. I like that they addressed that.
I will say that there's something about this scene that doesn't quite hang together for me, and I'll come back to that. What I do like, I agree with both of you in that I like the way Mike approaches her for the most part. It reminds me of what I liked and admired, in fact, so much in season 2, the way that Wolfhard is able to do this thing where he's able to ask questions and not sound accusatory. You know, his saying, I don't understand, but we do need to talk. I'm also going to credit direction for that, because I think that probably comes into play, but having Wolfhard already be good at that, I think they leaned on that. And, you know, even when she says to him, no, you don't know what it's like, he doesn't get defensive. He just continues to ask in good faith, which, I mean, to be honest, like that's pretty super mature in a moment like that. Like, I think even for adults that would be hard. But it's not so like I find it believable for Mike as a character. What I find interesting about this scene, but also like Elle and Mike's relationship in general by this point, is how interesting it stands in contrast to Lucas and Max. And I'm talking specifically about the thing that we don't ever see addressed, at least we haven't up to this point in their relationship, that's why I say the approach I like, except for one small thing, which is the way that he casually mentions Hop's cabin. Lucas is concerned for Max because he knows that she's grieving. And that's something that does not come up, again, at least up to this point, between Mike and Elle. So especially thinking about what the past year might have looked like, we don't get any indication as to how he treated her while she was grieving. Like, what was it like after the funeral? Given that Elle would be struggling, it seems weird to me, I guess, retroactively, that he would have bought these lies at all. Like, there wouldn't be.
I see what you're saying. That, like, why is it a shock to him that Elle is struggling because she's grieving? It's a new environment. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, I get what you mean.
I think the scene works kind of in its own right, but especially kind of like coming back to that tonal imbalance, especially when you compare this to the way that Lucas is like really going after Max, and they're not even together. He's like, I want to make sure you're okay. I want to make sure that you're coming out and not staying at home all the time. And like he's actively taking an interest in her, even though they're not together. And I feel like that would still be the kind of person that Mike would be. And I do feel like in this sequence, we get a bit more of the Mike that we knew in seasons 1 and 2. Now, in the interest of being fair, and actually a possibility that may actually answer some of our questions about why is 11 lying, it's possible that all of the lying is built into Elle's denial phase of her grieving, and that as such, we don't actually see what their interaction was like right after Hop died, et cetera, up through the move, and then immediately after. It's possible that 11 started lying immediately, that not unlike what Max will eventually say, that Elle was saying everything was fine and pretended that that she wasn't having a hard time right from the off. And that could be the reason for all of the lying all along, that it's all built into the denial that comes from grief. And that's why Mike doesn't have a different approach. Like, looking at the way that Max is behaving, her behavior is very clearly indicating that she's not okay. But unlike Max, Elle never stopped pretending she was fine. If that's the case, it kind of bothers me a little bit still, in that a lot of it is left up to us, the audience, to kind of put that together. It leaves me feeling a little bit, maybe not confused, but certainly a little bit vague on what happened there. And so that's ultimately what I'm getting at. I think Lucas and Max are a lot more is presented on their relationship a lot more clearly in a lot more succinct a fashion. And I just think that in this moment, in this scene, I just wish there had been like some indication, like some aspect of what's happening here, that has to do with the grief, I guess. That said, grief is a very important theme to me personally, so that might be a me thing. Again, like I said, this kind of all comes back to what I said initially, which is I ultimately like the scene. I like this exchange. again, the actors kill it, but there is just something about it that doesn't quite gel. It just doesn't quite hang together for me. Again, all of that said, it's hard to watch like in a good way. Although as a costume note, I think it's interesting that they're dressed kind of similarly. Their shirts are sort of similar to one another. One other thing that I do like about the scene, though, is I choose to read a lot of what Elle says in the first half of the scene as projecting. And I mean that like in a believable way. You were scared of me. You think I'm a monster. I think that's her fear talking, both in terms of how her fear of how he sees her, but it's also how I think she's feeling about herself. And so I think it's a very natural, it's a very human thing to do in a moment like that. It's super sad, but it makes sense to me. But at the same time, like, I don't necessarily have a problem with the idea that Mike would be a little afraid of her. Like, I think it kind of bums me out that they didn't decide to explore that a little bit. Like, I think that could have added an interesting tension. It's fine without it, I guess, but, knowing where the season goes, they definitely don't go in that direction. And then in terms of like just an idle curiosity that I was left with, not in they should have done this instead, just something I found myself going, I wonder what that would have looked like is if Will had talked to her instead of Mike. That was just something I kind of went, I wonder how differently that conversation might have went, especially because he too certainly knows what it's like to be bullied.
Yeah, and I wish we'd gotten to see more of, because it's kind of hinted at, we don't get to see like the buyers in California for very long.
No, we don't.
It's kind of hinted at that like the bond that Elle and Will have, which I really, really love. And that Will is kind of, every time the bullying happens, he freezes up. And I wish we'd gotten more inside his head, because you kind of have to infer that he's freezing up as like a trauma response there.
Mm-hmm.
To your point about how would that have gone, I think it's safe to assume that those type of conversations have happened between Elle and Will for the last like 8 months as he's been watching this happen to her. If he chose to, he could be happy in California. He could choose to have friends and connect with people there, but I got the sense he'd chosen not to out of loyalty to Elle. So I wish we'd gotten more to that, because he's got a variety of interests. Other classmates seem either they like him or they seem kind of, neutral on him. So it's not like he's socially awkward or he doesn't appear to be getting bullied. We see kind of glimpses of it, but we don't really get into his head and his perspective the way we get into Elle's.
Yeah.
And I wish we'd gotten that.
Yeah. Very, very hard. Same.
And now that you've said that about just the fact that she's grieving, so it shouldn't be a shock to Mike, that also makes me think of Will and the fact that like obviously Elle and Joyce are closest to Hopper, but it's not like that isn't a loss for Jonathan and Will as well. I would have liked to see more of their reaction to like the fact that he apparently died, and then Elle moved in with them.
Well, and Joyce.
Yeah, because now you've got me thinking about the roller rink and just the fact that like Mike is mad at Will that he didn't tell her he was struggling and he only called him like twice. It's like your friends, like your girlfriend and your best friend just lost somebody major.
Mm-hmm.
She moved in with them. They moved thousands of kilometers away from you to a foreign place they don't know. You barely kept in touch with them. You don't say I love you, and you're shocked that like that she's struggling.
Perhaps right after they left, he was saying it all the time. Hey, how are you doing? But that it faded. But the impression that I think that the scene leaves us with is that it's like, nope, that's because again, in season 3, he couldn't say it.
Yeah.
And so I think we're meant to infer that he's never been able to. I think that Mike's demonstration of, when he talks to her through the window, through the arrest, that felt very much like, yeah, there he is. There's Mike. And speaking of the arrest, I surprised myself watching that part. Like, I mean, all of kind of the points that you guys brought up earlier aside, I gotta be honest, I actually teared up during that sequence. Just when they come and take her away. I didn't the first time I watched it, but I did this time. And I don't know if it's because, and I don't know if it's just that it didn't occur to me until now that this must be just so triggering for her, that this is like being sent back to the lab, that must be what she's feeling. And just watching all that she loves and care about, I mean, Joyce isn't there, but what little of her life she had, however hard it's been, it's like, nope, she's being taken away from it. And that maybe there's this feeling in all of that of like, yeah, this was inevitable, wasn't it? She just looks so miserable and hopeless. It kind of broke my heart.
So defeated.
Yeah. And that's where I think some of the stuff in this episode, it manages to pull on your heartstrings in a way that I think make these moments ultimately work, even if they're pieces of them that don't fully hang together. But yeah, I teared up. I was surprised.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Like she seems so defeated. She's not even fighting it, and you have like Mike like screaming, like running after her. You see how protective Will is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, loved that.
Yeah. And the way just the subtlety, like I don't think there's a lot of like bloatedness and silliness that goes on with the California Nevada plot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the subtleness and some of the mannerisms of Finn Wolfhard and Noah Schnapp's acting get enough credit in this storyline
Mm-hmm.
because there's some subtle things they do where I'm like, that's really well done. Like when the police come to the door and like Elle comes down and Will puts his hand out,
Mm-hmm.
like that kind of just to halt her. You're both my sister and my friend, and
Mm-hmm.
like I got your back. Like spidey senses are up. Like why are the cops here? Like and I thought that, and the way he fights to see her, he's like we're family. Like you see Mike and Will unite in this shared like love and protectiveness of Elle
Mm-hmm.
that comes from a very genuine loving place. Find their way back to being closer through that. And I wish we could have seen A, more of it generally,
Yeah.
and B, we'd had more of that characterization, that front and center throughout the season. Because when it happens, it's so good, it's so well done. And I just wish we'd had more, it'd been more prominent, we'd seen more of that Will and Mike.
Yeah.
The scene when 11 is going off in the van, transported, she sees Mike chasing after her. The detail of her when she sees him, like turning away to, I presume, to cry. I really like that because, it just shows like, the shame that she now feels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not just because of what she's gotten herself into, but outside of maybe Hopper, I'd like to believe that Mike is like the main person that she does not want to disappoint because he's kind of inadvertently always put her up on a pedestal because of her powers and stuff, and he's never seen her like this at her lowest. He's always seen her when she's fighting off demogorgons or closing the gate, saving the world, and he never got to see her when she was in the lab. He never got to see her when she was at her lowest and doing, horrible things like, being forced to, kill a cat. And now hit a girl in the face with a roller skate, and now she got arrested for that. And yeah, I really like that detail that they included in there.
So Heidi is on record as stating that Elle's plotline is her least favorite of the season, but Ashley, I believe the Russia arc might just be your least favorite. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, Jasmine and I have talked about this, and I think,
Yeah.
Robin, you and I've kind of touched on it in the past, but it's not that I hate it. I just thought, the way they had it set up after season three, I thought it was going to go completely different than it did. And it was just very, very slow until like episode seven. And then, it picked up at the very, very end of the season.
Like how did the pieces of this arc in this particular episode hit you?
Well, I certainly thought that Hopper getting his foot hammered by a mallet and being able to walk around like nothing happened. I definitely thought that was unrealistic. I also didn't like the fact that Joyce Byers apparently can't tell when someone is high or smell the weed that
Yeah.
just, came through her house. I didn't really like that. I also kind of wish that after Joyce realized that Elle was upset, Like, why she didn't go just to at least knock on the girl's door and just ask her if everything was okay.
Yeah.
Joyce in the first half of season four, I wasn't crazy about because to me, she just wasn't the Joyce Byers that we've come to know and love. And it definitely showed in this episode. I thought Murray, like with, the little housewife comment, that was really funny.
I totally get where Ashley's coming from. I don't share her dislike of the Russia plot. I agree with some of her points. I just some things I did like were the fact that people pointed this out online, but the fact that Joyce got herself dolled up, like she apparently went to the bank and then got her hair done, and then like
Yeah.
you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit because like they're on their way to prison break Hopper. At the same time, I did love the fact that she's like, we're like, to her mind, they don't know at this point they're gonna have to prison break him. They just think that like they're gonna hand over the money. They know shenanigans are gonna go down, but that like they give the money, they get Hopper back in return, right? So I did like the fact that she went and got herself dolled up because in her mind she's like, all right, we're going to do this exchange. It's probably not going to go perfectly, but we're going to do this exchange and I'm going to see him again. And so she made sure that she looked her best, which you
Okay.
had to suspend her disbelief a little bit, but I did like that. That was important to her. I did like that.
I don't know. That's I'm gonna kind of echo what Ashley said. That feels actually wildly out of character for her to me. Like that has never been her style. Like she's like, nope, we do the thing now. Let's go. Like right now. Like it I mean, I think it's cute. It's fine. It doesn't like actively bother me, but I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
it
think it's cute.
actually
I do get what you're saying though about like, and when you're talking about the dinner and the fact that like I feel like what's supposed to come across is that like Jonathan's been hiding what's going on well enough that like she knows something's up, but she's not like she doesn't really realize what's up or what's going on until we get to that point.
I wonder, and I can just hear Heidi telling me that I'm giving them too much credit, but maybe what they're going for is actually picking up on something that actually really bothered me in season one. Not like, oh, it was written badly. It just made me sad in season one, which is that Joyce has always been a little bit more preoccupied with everybody except for Jonathan, in the sense that in season one, she didn't see him. Like, I mean, and again, there's context for that. She's struggling, etc., etc. But again, we don't see her struggling in this season. But the idea being, she's always been a little bit just behind with Jonathan. So I wonder if maybe that's kind of what they're going for, that it's more of, it's not about that she doesn't recognize that he's high, but I mean, she doesn't, but that it's more of a that she hasn't really been paying attention to him. I mean, that flies in the face of the idea of her asking the mailman in episode one about, any college letters, like she's
Yeah,
aware.
it's a little inconsistent
Yeah.
because like on the one hand, like she even acknowledged that in season one, she's like, I haven't been here, I haven't been
Hmm.
paying enough attention. And but like I agree that I think she's just a little bit she does pay attention to Jonathan, but she's a little bit
Yeah.
behind on that. But at the same time, yeah, it's I also feel like if we'd gotten a little bit more time with the buyers, it would have been clearer because Elsa and her letter, Joyce just got a new job, right? Where she's now
Hmm.
working from
Hmm.
home, right? But we don't know what her job was for the last several months. So like I kind of took that as she's been working out of the home, probably in sales. So we're probably back to a similar situation we were in season one, where like the kids are home alone a lot because Will is whereas
Hmm.
Joyce is working. And so if we take it from that perspective, that like, okay, she's not physically been in the house and now like, so Jonathan didn't have to take the same pains to hide what was going on because if your parent physically isn't home, right?
Yeah.
I kind of took it as, okay, she took this job to be around more and be closer to the kids, which makes sense, except like you're both right that like she clocks out with Jonathan, she doesn't probe him further. Elle runs off to her room. She like I presumably she checked on her, but we don't physically see her go check on her.
Hmm.
Will's there rolling his eyes. Like there seems to be a bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because I feel like we kind of like we meaning like the three of us here, but also like my, Jenna and Heidi. And I feel like collectively we as the fandom as well have we seem to keep coming back to this sense of like, I wish we'd had more time. And also this is too bloated. Like, it's this weird paradox of like, it just seems like it continues to come up because, and I'm gonna reiterate some of the stuff that Jenna said in season 3. Like, it's this idea, I think, of we've also gotten to the point where the cast is just so big, the cast of characters is so big, but also like we're at the point where so much of us are just so invested in their lives that we're kind of like, we want to know a little bit more just about the lives that they're living, you know?
Yeah, as opposed to supernatural. And
Yeah.
we wanted more time on specific things. We
Yes.
wanted more time not on what they showed us.
Yes.
We could have gone through a montage of the van, or we could have gone through a montage of, we kind of did with Hopper, but sped that up to give us more time with the buyers.
I think as far as like how I feel about the Russia arc, I think I probably fall somewhere between the two of you. I don't mind it. Like, I actually enjoy some of the scenes, not the one where Hopper gets his leg broken. You know, I've said before, I enjoy Dmitri or Antonov or Enzo, however you choose to reference him. I just really like him. I think a lot of that is Tom Woloschka. I think he's got a lot of charisma, and I think he and Harbor have a lot of chemistry together.
I do want to say that's in my notes too, that I love the relationship between Dmitri and Hopper.
They're great. They're great.
They're great.
They're great.
As a lover of history, I really loved seeing a 1980s Soviet gulag. I know, a lot of people, when they think of like a POW camp or a prison camp like this, most minds go to, the Nazis. And how many people, I think, really think about a Soviet gulag?
And that they took it seriously. They didn't treat it comedically like they did in season 3. Well, let's shift out of Russia. Let's go back to Hawkins, because Hawkins is where all the good stuff is happening. So, in Hawkins, as regards Steve, Max, Dustin, Eddie, Robin, Nancy, what are your thoughts on that group in Hawkins?
In the first kind of part of the season, when Lucas decides to join Jason, the rest of the gang, in looking for Eddie, they really made me dislike Lucas for the first part of it, up until about the point when he ditches them at the cabin and tricks them.
Which is like most of the episode.
Yeah, so I get that, and I do get his motivation about wanting to be one of the gang, and since, his friends and his sister just like freaking abandoned him at this really important game, I get that. But at the same time, I think there was a naivete about Lucas when, they're not just like getting in the car to go drive and talk to Eddie. They've got stuff in the back of the car to hurt him. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty obvious. But I think, it is naivete. I think Lucas did really believe that, they were just going to do it to scare them. Or that's, I think, what he hoped to be true. Like, he wanted to be one of the gang. Mm-hmm. And then when they get to where, like, the band is practicing and Jason, like, immediately takes it way too far. That's when you see Lucas be like, oh shit. But like, he doesn't leave. And I kept being like, dude, ditch these people. And that, like, I really loved the sequence where you hear Owen's voiceover and Lucas is running. Mm-hmm. Like, he's booking it. I loved that sequence. Yeah, I really love that. And I think the turning point in Jason's storyline also comes when he, like, that's the first moment, like, we obviously see him break down later, but when he steps on that one guy's hand, like, to me, that was a moment where he went from, like, douchebag jock, kind of like Steve was in season 1, or like a Tommy, to, oh my God, this guy's taking it way too far. And then in terms of, like, the way things were shot, the sequence of, like, Patrick having the visions in the car, I thought that was really well done. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Vecna, hands down, my favorite villain. I probably never wanted to see a villain more than Vecna. Like, in this episode in particular, we don't really actually see a whole lot of him, and I was almost kind of like really disappointed because not that I wanted to see any more, people die or anything, but I'm like, so are we going to see Vecna again? Like, is he gonna, come up again?
Right.
But I will say that in this episode in particular, this is the first time we see Vecna's mindscape and see how he picks his victims. Mm-hmm. Every person that was, he was going through, like, they all had, issues and stuff. But, he settled on yet another teenager who apparently has issues at home with his father. And we immediately say, the little nosebleed, and it's like, oh, well, it was nice knowing you, Patrick,
That was a surprise. I had not remembered that we got that little bit of detail because my takeaway from our reactions was we don't really know his trauma, but like nope, there it is. They did plant it. And I was like, "Ah, okay, cool."
And also, like what Jasmine was saying, the first two episodes, I really thought that Lucas really was going to the dark side, but I really liked that by the end of this episode, he realized, this ain't for me. This is not who I am. This was fun, but I got to go back with my friends. Um, and I really liked how they cut the little montage there with Owens talking and seeing Lucas run out. And the biggest
Yeah.
surprise was finding out that he led them to the cabin, which I thought um was really cool.
Yeah.
Max and company breaking into the school and figuring out what's been going on, and then she's the next victim. Really a big surprise for me watching it the first time. At that point you're thinking Max is gonna die.
Yeah, she's doomed. Yeah.
But I did like at the very end when she goes out and sees the clock. That was probably the creepiest vision to me because it was a dark hallway and you just hear this clock chiming creepily. I like the pacing of the Hawkins plot in this episode as well.
It's so good. Yeah.
Also, Mrs. Kelly still, there's something about her that I just can't place. I don't know if she's a Vecna agent or not, or maybe that's just her way, but she's definitely one to watch out for.
Yeah, now that you two have called that to my attention in some of our other conversations that we've had, I can't unsee it. I don't like have any like active thing to add of that, but I think it's interesting you guys, I swear no pun intended, clocked that because I totally didn't. It had not even occurred to me because I was so focused on the like, oh cool, Max has a counselor sheet. There's some aspect of mental health and therapy involved, but yeah, the more now that you guys have pointed that out, I'm like, I think you might be onto something. Yeah.
I find when people talk to us, like we hear from other like hosts and stuff, that the counselor and Will touching his neck and Sateria, like those are the two things people kind of bring up. That like, I didn't notice that. Where it's like Miss Kelly is so sus to me and Ashley and then to all of my friends. Everyone was like, oh my God. I'm like, I
Yeah.
know. And we thought that was obvious to everybody, but it just goes to show you there's so many layers and everyone will interpret it differently and so much to explore. And I love that's the setup they're building.
I get that they needed to go to Miss Kelly's house to get the keys to her office, but come on, like these kids know how to pick a lock. Like they didn't have to, do that.
Yeah, Max is a rogue. She can totally do that.
Yeah. Annie Munson's character is based on a lot of about Damien Eccles, one of the West Memphis Three, a member of that group. His last name, was actually Miss Kelly. So I think they probably definitely named Miss Kelly after
Hmm.
him. If not, that's such a big coincidence.
And I like the scenes where they kind of cut back in the season between the character that goes into the trance and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think because also in interviews, like before season four came out, when we had trailers and stuff, the Duffer Brothers outright said, Max has seen the clock, that's not good. And then I especially loved it's such a dramatic scene that I think something that Hawkins plot does really well. You have very, very serious or like spooky scenes, and then to cut the tension, comedic timing, little things like that, and physical comedy worked really well to transition from one part of the story to another in Hawkins. So I really enjoyed that.
I know that there's no really sense in continuing to criticize the Hawkins Police Department, but Miss Kelly is the counselor of Fred, Chrissy, and Max. Who knows? Maybe Patrick. We don't know, but definitely we know Fred, Chrissy, and Max were all seeing her. Like any seasoned investigator would, if they knew about that, why isn't Miss Kelly listed as a suspect in the murders? Because she was seeing all of them, and now all of a sudden, days after a counseling session, they end up dead.
In terms of Powell and Callahan, though, I will say that, like, to kind of throw them a little bit of credit, I will say that, like, they are asking, like, good questions to Nancy at the crime scene, but I also have to say I actually really appreciate the way Powell interacts with Nancy. Like, he's gentle with her. You know, I mean, considering that they're talking to her about her friend, her classmate, her newspaper colleague, if you will, who is now dead. And like that, so and she handles all of that awfully well, given all of that. But yeah, I just kind of like that. I think Powell is aware of that, and so I appreciated that little detail that he's gentle with her.
I think that's what makes the Hawkins plot realistic to me, is that, like, I get the sense that the deputies are doing their very best. Their best kind of sucks. They're definitely feeling the fact that, like, man, they should have paid better attention when Hopper was chief. Because it's, to them, it's like, it's Hawkins, right? They are gentle with her, and I think they are asking the right questions. I truly do believe they're doing their best, but it's over their heads.
I personally read Nancy's reaction to seeing the others arrive. Everything else aside, I just see that as a moment where Nancy is dealing with shock, powerlessness, probably some level of guilt, and then suddenly there are her friends and her confidants and people that she can trust with all the weird shit, all that side of it. And I read that as just a moment of relief and comfort. And at the same time, there's like possibly a bit of like, oh shit, if they're here, something must be up. I like that moment a lot. I remember being surprised when I saw it, because that's a prominent image of Steve, Robin, Max, and Dustin getting out of the car. I remember that was a standout shot from the trailer. So I was like, interesting that that's where it actually occurs in the story. And I like that moment a lot. Jasmin, you mentioned the use of humor. The example that I thought of was when, at the prospect of Max driving Steve's, no, never again, anyone but you. I love all of the little interactions between Steve and Dustin. I mean, the thing that I don't think gets talked about often enough in the scene of them in the car when Dustin calls Steve out, he's like, whoa, too far, is that the scene ends when they do the little fist bump. It's precious. I love it so much. And I really like the scenes with Nancy and Robin at the library. I mean, I love the way that pays off in the following episode, but just that stuff, I could easily see that stuff shifting into being too drawn out and too like dull and kind of killing the pacing, but I don't think it does, because of the fact that they are researching, they're looking for information, and that we're building on their relationship through that.
When they were looking at the microfiche with that Weekly Watcher article, I kind of wish they would have just showed us like the entire microfiche of it and have Robin, narrate it, kind of like what happened in season 1. When Hopper was looking into the lab.
Oh, yeah.
Because, they did that teaser, like 2021, of the microfiche and of, like, apparently the whole massacre. And there was, like VC, drawn out in blood on the walls and stuff. It was, like, on a bloody bed. And season 4 comes, and it's, like, nothing like that as we see. And that could have been a red herring. They just want to throw us off. But yeah,
I wonder if maybe they didn't because they wanted to keep the emphasis on them, like on their characters. But yeah, they could have done both. It's interesting. Huh.
That's such a good point. Actually, I've seen other people talk online about like why there's such a discrepancy, like the teasers we get, and how that differs so greatly from what we find out actually happened. And people will be like, well, is that embellishment in the media? Or like, are we missing something there? So I agree, it would have been cool to see the full thing.
It makes me wonder if that might have been something where they had actually planned to do more, and then it was just one of those things that like they cut it for time.
I really loved the library scene, actually. Like, I thought it was super hilarious.
Yeah, it's great.
Because when they teased that Nancy and Robin were going to team up and become friends, I was super pumped for it, for exactly this reason, because Nancy and Robin have very different approaches and personalities, but they're both very smart in their own way. And I think that's part of why Steve is so drawn to them. Who wouldn't be? And I like that they kind of, the dynamic of, I like that it kind of took Nancy down a notch. I love Nancy, but there's a reason she kind of has a reputation for being a bit of a press, because she can kind of be quick to judge and not realize she's doing it. And I really like the fact that they address that and that you see, she's kind of, um, you can tell she's kind of made assumptions about Robin. And in those scenes, you see her realize that, like, we're both smart in our own way. And with what Robin tells her, and the fact that Robin's kind of thinking helps them figure out what they're looking for. And she realizes that, her and Steve are not a thing, she's not a threat. And you see Nancy kind of realize that, like, oh, I've judged this person incorrectly. And you see them, that kind of starts them on the road to becoming friends. And Robin, an appreciation for the fact that, like, it was supposed to be a shot in the dark, but it was a bullseye, that what Nancy's onto is smart, and they're going in the right direction. So I really like that we got to see that. I also liked that they've kept this consistent, but Marissa the librarian.
Yeah, I noticed her too.
She's the same librarian that Hopper slept with and didn't call back in season 1.
Well, I think she's in season 2 as well.
They've kept her the same people, which I just loved.
Yeah, it's nice touch. I like all nothing really to add there. I just really enjoy those scenes. And then just to comment on the stuff with Lucas. First of all, I think it's super ironic and in a poetic irony kind of way that Jason says the words, "We're not killers like Eddie," to Lucas, given what will happen between them later on. And I mean that as a compliment. I like the way that that's set up. I don't think any of us bought that for a second, but yeah. I know Heidi definitely agrees with you guys about all of this with Lucas's characterization. But I posited in chapter 2 that Lucas's reaction to the kind of mob mentality that starts with the basketball team, his reaction to that struck me as that he was scared, as well as angry, but there was a large fear component in that. And I stand by that for that episode. But in this moment, or I should say in these moments, I think it's possible to read Jason telling Lucas, "You can go home. You'll still be one of us, all right?" as either sincere, that Jason believes that, or that it's a bald-faced lie, that if he leaves, then he's immediately going to be suspect. But even if he is sincere, Jason is being honest, no, if you go, cool, don't worry about it. We're older than you, we'll take care of it. I still think that Lucas knows that permission may not extend to Patrick and Andy, and that they might just follow him. So that was his motivation for staying with them, that it's still out of fear and not out of the wanting to be part of their group. But after the opening, yeah, I think I have to start agreeing with you guys. It's off. There's something off about the way this proceeds, because it doesn't feel like Lucas to me. And it's what he says to the other Hellfire Club members that just feels wrong. The fact that he says to Dustin later that it seems that, like Max, at first believes that Eddie is responsible. I really wanted to cling to that notion that Lucas is acting out of fear, but I don't think that holds up. Bums me out, but I'm glad that this doesn't go on past this episode. He manages to stay with him long enough where he can make a clean getaway, and in a way long enough that he knows that Dustin is personally in danger now, but that, yeah, it's still unpleasant. It's not great to watch it. Yeah.
Just to your point, I think it's both, I think it's the desire to be part of the group, to be popular, and also a little bit of fear, a little bit of what happens now. I think it's all of those things.
Okay.
Something I know the Duff brothers have talked about in interviews is, they have great memories of middle school and only horrible memories of high school. And I think it's experience for a lot of us. And that part of their personal experience, which definitely feeds into this, is, being part of kind of the nerdy crowd when you're younger, and then you get into high school, especially when they grow up, sports are huge. Mm-hmm. So you had friends who were more athletic and, made different friends, and that transition period and all the stuff that goes along with that, and how those are their personal memories. They really wanted to show that. So I think what they were trying to show is that transition, right? Where you kind of have your foot in one world and the other. And I think Lucas is dealing with that. And again, if there were not supernatural stuff going on, that would be totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like there's nothing wrong with trying to, kind of find your place in high school or in life, which you do as you kind of get older. But because there's supernatural stuff and people are dying, it very quickly escalates. And it
Yeah.
escalates a lot faster, I think, than Lewis is expecting, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's kind of the oh shit, the turning point moment there.
Yeah. And then, yeah, very glad that Dustin's mom wasn't home.
Yeah.
Don't know where she was. Don't care. Just glad she wasn't there. Like,
Yeah.
just good, because we love her. And then the final movement, which you both have touched on a little bit already, but just pretty much everything from Elle and Owens at the diner, intermixed with everything else. I love the way this ending is constructed. It's been soured a little, given that Owens doesn't tell Elle the full truth. But I loved the sequence, especially that first time. I loved the idea of him giving her the choice. And despite what happens, I still do. Like, when it comes to the lab anyway, she's been forced into each part of her life. I mean, again, the lost sister excluded. Like, that was a choice. But this is the one time where it seems, anyway, that she has a little bit more agency over this aspect of her life, and it is her choice. She does make a choice. And that Owens isn't wrong or dishonest as regards her being suspect of what's happening in Hawkins. I wish that they hadn't had the misdirect. Like, I almost would have preferred him to tell her that Brenner was part of this and that maybe she doesn't believe him, so that it's still a surprise. And that maybe, I don't think it needs to be a shock when she sees him alive. I have a hard time getting past that. But other than that, yeah. And I know that in this moment, because this is probably something that maybe some listeners have been thinking about every time that I've mentioned the idea of Elle using her powers at the rink as part of what drew so much attention to it. I still think the sequence could have worked with it. Like, even though she tells Owens directly, I don't have my powers, I think that could have worked in the sense of if she's also keeping something close to the vest. I still think it could have worked. But yeah, and then the editing of this sequence, 10 out of 10, no notes. Like, it's just so well constructed. Credit to the editors of this episode, Dean Zimmerman and Nat Fuller. And also because I mentioned the DPs for the previous two episodes. The DP for this episode was Brett Jetkowitz. But yeah, just tremendous ending.
Yeah, I love the editing of this sequence. I do also love that Owens gives her a choice. And I kind of saw it as that's an interesting take on it. Like, obviously Brenner was a bit of shock value, but I kind of saw it more as, like, to me, I don't get lulled into a false sense of security very often. So something I did really love about this season is it managed to lull me into a false sense of security, or a sense of, I know something is off, but I can't tell you what it is. So that the final reveal or the shock was genuine. And that's rare for me. And something I loved about this season is it did it twice in a big way. It did it once with the reveal of Brenner, and then a second time with Henry/Warren/Vecna. Parsons does such a good job. You're right about that. That he walks that line. That 90% of the time, I think that is genuine concern. That is genuinely who he is. He's someone who cares, who took on a difficult job but wants to do it with as much humanity as possible. But then there's that 10% of the time.
Yeah, I didn't particularly care for Dr. Owen's embellishment of what 11 would actually be walking into in terms of the Nina Project and who all was associated with that. I do like how when he explains what all is happening in Hawkins, because he's not just referring to what's currently happening in Hawkins, but it seems like he's referring to what has happened in the previous seasons. And he seems to be more aware and knowledgeable of the occurrences than Brenner does, because he says, it's like a virus. Each time it comes back, it mutates, it becomes, stronger, more powerful, more, deadly, more dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that they, wrote that in, because, Owens gets it. Whereas Brenner, seems he just likes, the power and control that science has, given him. But Owens just really understands what all this is and seems to have a pretty good understanding of how to stop it. And it's like y'all said, desperate times.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's not his, what he would consider his brightest moment, lying to this girl about what she's about to undertake, and then having to, what I presume to agree with Brenner and say, yep, let's shave her head. Let's, against her will. And I'm sure is not a moment that he's very proud of. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, it's like what Nancy said in season 3, we ask for forgiveness later. Now he's like we need her in order to defeat this thing. And that's why I am hoping that he comes back in season 5.
Yeah. And I guess we'll see where it goes. So moving into final thoughts, just a few here. To my surprise, I really liked this episode so far through the rewatch. I think as a complete episode, as a complete piece from start to finish, I think this one might be my favorite, which is a big surprise to me. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm landing at this point in the journey through season 4. In the previous episodes, I've mentioned the visuals and how they were so imperative to the storytelling and keeping track of everything. But in this one, the visuals are still great, but the editing really stood out to me. The weaving together of the multiple plots seems to have increased this episode, and it did so very, very well. The tone stayed pretty grounded throughout, except for a couple of the bits with Jonathan and Argyle, and some of the things we talked about, for me anyway, I feel like in spite of some of those unrealistic aspects, I do think that overall the tone, the pitch, I suppose, is what I'm getting at, feels roughly the same. Overall, it's very serious and very grounded, and even in its unrealistic aspects, and I think that's what I liked most about it. This episode isn't perfect, and it has the unfair disadvantage that it is to be followed by Dear Billy. This one has its rough spots and the frequently mentioned bloat, but it flowed together here much more smoothly than I think other episodes do in this season. And I think, again, the tone has a lot to do with that. Despite the Russia sequences feeling obligatory, I don't think they're badly done. And we'll definitely talk more about that next episode. When watching it the first time, I felt like this was building to something significant, and it still translates that way to me, even knowing how it proceeds. But yeah, not much else to say other than I enjoyed this episode way more than I expected to. And that, then, is going to conclude our contemplation on Chapter 3, The Monster and the Superhero. As always, thank you so much for listening, and if you've got comments, questions, thoughts, you can join the conversation by finding us on social media. Coughing Contemplation is on TikTok and Instagram, and you can also email us. Links for all of those things are in the show notes, along with those for the Ham Radio podcast. Thanks again so much to you both for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for listening. And until next time, over and out.